And I'm actually going to put in a last question. I would be curious, given the piece in the Australian from the Australian Christian Lobby yesterday, and the fact that we have on our site a great blog from the president of the Uniting Church talking about his support for a Human Rights Act. I wonder, as a father, whether or not you have an opinion in relation to religious groups and their engagement with the consultation process and support or otherwise for human rights protection in the form of an act.
Well, of course, I wrote a book a few years ago called Acting on Conscience, where I looked at the place of law, religion and politics, and I'm firmly of the view that religious people are as entitled as anyone else to engage in the political process. It doesn't help them very much to use religious arguments if those arguments are not accessible to other members of the public. Having chaired this inquiry, I'd have to say one curious thing for me was that at least the media perception seemed to be that the so-called Australian Christian Lobby spoke for the churches. Now, if you look at the submissions we actually received, that's not true. Now, I'm not blowing the trumpet of the Catholic Church, but it is the largest church in Australia. Its organ of governance is the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference. Now, I think 26% of the Australian population is Catholic. Now, that Bishops' Conference said that they were neutral at this stage on the issue of whether there should be a Human Rights Act. If you look at the Anglican Church, the next biggest church in Australia, over 20% of Australians are Anglican. Their mode of governance is through their General Synod. I met with their General Synod. They provided a very detailed submission, which I think on a fair reading you'd have to say was moderately supportive of a Human Rights Act. Now, the Uniting Church, a smaller church, but still 7% of the Australian population. Now, they work in a more democratic mode. Their National Assembly put a submission to us where I think it would only be fair to say they were robustly in support of a Human Rights Act. So, suffice to say that the position publicly put by the Australian Christian Lobby, and they're entitled to, this is a democracy, and they, like you and Get Up, ran campaigns. Let's make no mistake, there weren't campaigns just on one side, but I think there's been a media misperception that the Christian Lobby speaks for the Australian Christian churches, and on this issue, the Christian Lobby's strong antipathy to a Human Rights Act is definitely not reflected by the leaderships of the three major churches. Now, what the view is in the pews generally, you could argue the toss on that as you could with the Australian community generally. That's why we did the inquiry with the focus groups and then the opinion polling, where we found, as you know, 50% in support of a Human Rights Act, and I think it was only something like 7% or 14% opposed. So there you have it.
Great. Thank you very much for giving us some time and answering those questions of our supporters. Frank.
Pleasure.
Most
good to be with you. And
Thank
congratulations to all of those from Amnesty. I was walking through the Canberra shopping centre yesterday and was accosted by a fine young woman in a yellow T-shirt asking me what I was doing for human rights. I just smiled benignly at her and wished her a very pleasant day. So I hope everyone out there is working for human rights.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.